Welcome to Dialogue. Today's topic is part of an extensive series on the modern dating crisis. Our mission today is, well, to try and cut straight through the noise, the confusion surrounding relationship formation right now. If you're out there navigating this landscape of modern partnership, chances are you felt it.
Oh, absolutely.
This deep structural instability, that feeling that you and the person you're interested in are operating with totally different user manuals.
Or even different maps to completely different destinations.
Exactly. So we're doing an in-depth analysis of why it all feels so confusing and unstable. And at its core, it really seems to be the collapse of what were once, these shared foundational expectations about what a partnership even is.
Expectations about commitment, loyalty, the whole point of it.
Right. And the central tension isn't a lack of opportunity. The data suggests there are plenty of options, maybe too many. The real issue is a collision.
A collision, that's a good way to put it.
It's where these deep-seated, often outdated assumptions about what a relationship is, they just slam into all of these radical new possibilities that exist now. You can meet someone, they're charming, you're compatible, but then you find out your blueprints for the relationship.
The architecture itself.
The architecture is fundamentally incompatible, and the whole thing just crumbles. It's not because of a personality flaw, but because the structure itself, it just won't hold.
And that structural incompatibility is the key instability. It's the whole thing. We're all looking for connection, but we're playing by these radically different and usually unspoken rules.
Unspoken is the key word there.
Completely. Rules about the objective of the connection. How long is it supposed to last? What level of merging emotional logistical is required? What obligation does it entail? The system is so fractured that even defining something as simple as exclusivity can become this overwhelmingly complex negotiation.
Because the underlying definition of what we means is it's all over the place.
It differs wildly from person to person.
Okay, let's unpack this. I think we have to start with the historical context to really get it. We can't understand the chaos of right now without appreciating the certainty of the past. So before this fragmentation, what were those foundational, non-negotiable values that made things predictable?
The research we've looked at points to a very clear architecture. It was resting on three really sturdy pillars.
And these weren't just, cultural suggestions, were they?
Not at all. You couldn't just opt out of them. They were the essential operating system for societal cohesion, for stability. When everyone was running on that same default software, you didn't have to spend the first few months negotiating foundational principles.
The destination was just assumed.
The destination was assumed. And that assumption minimized all that friction, all that negotiation.
Yeah.
It was structurally efficient, even if, and this is a big if, it was emotionally restrictive for a lot of individuals.
Okay, so let's get into those three pillars. Pillar one, marriage and family as the default destinations.
Right. The entire dating or courtship phase, as it was called, it existed primarily as a vetting process.
A vetting process for what, specifically?
For formal marriage and then the creation of a family unit, a reproductive unit. That was the goal.
So the destination was everything.
Everything. A relationship's success was measured by its ability to progress toward the altar. If it stalled, or if it ended before that institutional commitment.
It was seen as a failure.
Implicitly, yes.
Yeah.
A failure of purpose. And this provided a really clear timeline, a motivation. You have this whole economic and legal framework supporting it too. Shared assets, defined inheritance, tax incentives, all of it was optimized to reinforce that one outcome.
And that shared goal must have allowed for a much faster escalation of intimacy, both emotional and physical.
It did, because the commitment and that associated safety net, it was guaranteed institutionally, so you could be vulnerable faster.
And that structural permanence, that must have provided an enormous amount of certainty for everyone involved, right?
It was a framework where partners could confidently merge everything. Their financial futures, where they lived, their entire identities, because the institution itself promised that longevity.
The goal wasn't just to find a buddy, it was to find a co-pilot for a shared permanent project.
Exactly, a co-pilot. The whole system was designed to lock the relationship in place. This meant that the emotional risk of merging your lives it was balanced out by the certainty that breaking that merger was going to be economically and socially punitive.
So it was less about maximizing individual happiness.
And entirely about ensuring the structural preservation of the family unit, all for societal continuity.
Which brings us right to pillar two, loyalty and commitment as intrinsic foundations. In that old architecture, exclusivity and fidelity, they weren't optional add-ons you negotiated later.
No, they were assumed features. The moment a relationship took any recognizable form, that was the deal. The meaning of being together was standardized. It was the same across the culture.
So is a simple binary.
A simple binary. If you were committed, you were exclusive. This standardized, implied contract meant that loyalty was just the baseline. It was tied inherently to commitment. If you were in a serious courtship, you were automatically off the market.
And that removes this exhausting communicative burden that we have today.
Completely. All the defining boundaries, the sexual expectations, whether or not your partner is secretly keeping their options open, that just wasn't a major concern.
And what's often overlooked about that baseline loyalty is the depth of emotional safety it must have provided.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Because the agreement was implicit and it was backed by so much societal pressure, there was an inherent security, a security that your partner wasn't just, waiting for a better option to come along.
And that's fascinating because that high level of safety probably required very little actual conversation about the topic.
Precisely. If someone was disloyal, the entire community understood the contract had been violated. The social penalty was immense. So this implicit fidelity, it created an environment where you could dedicate real emotional energy to the partnership without constant surveillance or clarification.
The system enforced the commitment.
The system enforced it, which allowed the individuals to focus on maintaining the partnership, not policing its security.
And that leads to the final one, pillar 3. Sacrifice and staying together. This is where the commitment was really tested, right? Way beyond the ceremony.
This was the paramount value, enduring difficulties for the sake of the partnership. The whole, for better or worse, ethos, but taken very, very seriously. And this was structurally reinforced by traditional gender roles.
Which, however limiting they were.
And they were very limiting. They provided absolute certainty, clarity about domestic roles, financial roles, emotional responsibilities.
The main goal was just preserving the unit.
The preservation of the unit was the overriding principle, and that demanded mutual sacrifice of individual desires, often drastic sacrifice.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. If the husband needed to relocate for a job that guaranteed the family's financial stability, the wife followed. It wasn't really a discussion. Her personal desires, her professional aspirations in that original city, they were secondary.
The decision was just predetermined by the structural goals.
It was. The individual had to subordinate their career, their location, their financial freedom to the needs of the unit.
Well, what about something like financial decisions?
A great example. Historically, a couple's finances were almost always entirely merged. Decisions were made through the lens of maximizing family stability. That often meant foregoing personal luxuries or risky career changes. And even in times of severe difficulty, the pressure to stay together was immense, often backed by religious or community structures.
Divorce was a massive stigma.
Hugely stigmatized, often economically crippling. It was viewed as a failure not just of the couple, but of the community that supported them. The goal was permanence, and permanence required that willingness to endure unhappiness or personal compromise for the longevity of the structure.
So the trade-off was individual freedom.
For structural certainty, that was the deal.
Okay, so that was the world then. Let's fast forward.
And this is where it gets fascinating. We see that singular path just shatter. It becomes what we have now, a mosaic of competing intentions. When we talk about the modern dating crisis, we are fundamentally talking about a structural collapse.
A collapse where the underlying assumptions about what a relationship is for, they're no longer shared.
And the core problem is that these radically different intentions are constantly intersecting in the dating pool. It leads to confusion and then, inevitably, profound disappointment.
This is where you really see that collision of values, isn't it? You could be on a date with someone who fundamentally wants that traditional permanence and security,
while they're talking to someone who views that exact level of commitment as an immediate, unacceptable threat to their personal autonomy, their self-actualization.
So we need to systematically examine the spectrum of intent. I think understanding these conflicting goals is the only way to really navigate this landscape. Let's start with the group that has the closest tie to the past, the new traditionalists. These are the people still operating with that old framework. They're seeking formal marriage, family, the permanence we just talked about.
And they represent a shrinking portion of the dating pool. But their commitment level is, by definition, the highest. What the data shows is that their search is just. It's far more difficult. It's more protracted, complex, and emotionally draining.
Why is that exactly?
It's precisely because their desired outcome, institutional commitment, is no longer the societal default. They're looking for an explicit yes to a life trajectory that most other people have implicitly rejected.
So they're vetting for this one specific goal in a pool that's dominated by all these other fragmented, often low commitment intentions.
Exactly, and that leads to immense frustration. Their search, which they see as a life-defining decision, is often treated with just casual disregard by potential partners. They often report feeling like they have to screen 100 people just to find one who shares that same foundational vision.
Okay, so then we move into a completely different world, the non-monogamous architectures. This is a spectrum in itself, but let's focus on polyamory, since it's such an explicitly structured alternative.
Right, and it's critical to define polyamory not as casual dating, but as a highly structured, ethically governed choice. It is a value system, it's centered on non-exclusivity, but it still demands immense commitment and trust within a network of relationships.
So it's not the absence of rules, it's a different set of very complex rules.
Extremely complex. Unlike the implicit fidelity of the past, poly structures require rigorous, often exhaustive, explicit communication. Some of the research even refers to them as relationship contracts or agreements, all to manage boundaries, emotional energy, and jealousy across multiple, deep, committed relationships.
So while it rejects that historical pillar, too, of exclusivity,
It requires a level of communication and emotional labor that far exceeds what many traditional relationships require. Its clarity of intent, though, makes it incompatible with the traditional seekers, but it's actually less chaotic than the next segment we should talk about.
the segment that lacks any guiding principles at all.
Precisely.
And that next segment is where so much of the modern confusion comes from, the roster casual segment. The goal here is purely transactional or short-term gratification. And you say we have to distinguish between casual interaction and maintaining a roster.
The distinction is absolutely crucial. Casual interaction often implies a mutually acknowledged low expectation of any future investment. A roster, on the other hand, is a strategic, calculated management system.
A management system.
Yes, the individual maintaining a roster is deliberately and actively keeping multiple non-exclusive options available. It's to ensure a consistent, low-effort supply of needs fulfillment, whether that's physical or emotional validation or just social company, without ever dedicating the necessary resources, time, or commitment to any single person.
So it's an architecture designed specifically for what? Maximizing personal freedom.
Maximizing personal liquidity and minimizing exposure to relationship risk.
And the psychology here is fascinating, isn't it? It feels like it's driven in part by that paradox of choice. Having so many options makes committing to one feel like an active loss.
It absolutely is. The abundance mindset that's fostered by dating technology promotes this high liquidity. Why settle for a potential 7 when, with almost no effort, you can keep 4 sevens on rotation while you're still hunting for an 8? The person on the roster track prioritizes availability over dedication.
And this is where you get the starkest collision. I mean, let's use that specific example. One person views a second date as a definitive sign of mutual investment, a step toward exclusivity. They're interpreting shared vulnerability as proof of growing commitment. That's the traditional track.
Right. Meanwhile, the other person views that exact same second date simply as the next available slot on their calendar, a scheduled necessity to maintain the required emotional or physical flow with their various options. That's the roster track.
The action is identical.
Identical. But the internal structural interpretation is diametrically opposed. It's a recipe for disaster. And that leads us right into the heart of the modern individualism movement, what we can call the independence priorities. Here, the highest intrinsic value is placed on self-sufficiency, autonomy, and the preservation of one's own curated individual life.
Which is the polar opposite of that historical value of sacrifice.
The complete opposite. The historical model positioned the partnership as the foundational element, and the individual life was built around it. The modern independence above all model completely reverses this.
So the relationship has to fit into this pre-existing, highly curated life.
Exactly. A life that includes career, travel, hobbies, finances. If the relationship demands too much accommodation, or if it compromises a long-term individual goal, it's immediately seen as unsustainable. It's treated like an optional add-on, not the structural core of a life.
And that mindset, it must inevitably lead to the desire for, well, partnership without responsibility.
That's the manifestation of it. It's seeking the emotional benefits of a partnership, the comfort, the sex, the companionship, the public validation, while aggressively avoiding the associated long-term obligations.
So what do those avoided obligations look like in practice?
It's refusing to merge finances, avoiding any shared future planning, minimizing emotional labor during a partner's crisis, or refusing to integrate the partner into family or deeply personal social circles.
It's the consumer model of relationships.
That's a great way to put it.
You want to enjoy the high-quality product, the intimacy, the support, without taking on the burden of maintenance or liability or the shared risk. You want a consistent partner who is reliable but also requires minimal resources and can be easily disconnected if your needs change.
And the research connecting to this behavior suggests it's often driven by a deep fear of losing personal flexibility. The perceived cost of losing autonomy, the ability to move cities, change careers, spend money selfishly, is seen as much higher than the emotional benefits of structural commitment.
So they're pre-vetting for an easy breakup.
In a sense, yes. They've witnessed the painful, expensive, and logistically draining process of untangling lives that were historically merged, and they want no part of it.
Okay, moving on. We get to the compromise structures. This is where people seem to be trying to reconcile that human need for stability with the modern aversion to risk. A key example being long-term companionship without commitment.
These structures are fascinating because on the surface, they often look and feel exactly like a traditional marriage. They live together, they might share significant financial burdens like a mortgage or pets, they manage a household jointly, but they deliberately exclude the formal legal commitment.
So they want stability and continuity, but without the institutional tie.
Right. They might cite philosophical opposition to marriage, but frequently it boils down to prioritizing personal liquidity and minimizing legal risk.
But if they're merging their lives so thoroughly, what is the actual practical difference created by withholding that formal commitment?
The practical difference is the inherent security for the party who does want that commitment. In this structure, the exit strategy for the less committed partner remains simpler, cheaper, and faster. This lack of institutional validation means the power dynamic is inherently skewed toward the person who values the structure less.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture,
It reflects a deep aversion to institutional failure. It's a why risk a messy divorce when we can have all the benefits without the legal entanglement kind of mindset. It provides emotional certainty, but only up to a point. The structure is only as strong as the current willingness of the less committed partner to stay.
and related to that are the purely lifestyle partnerships.
These are defined by functional synergy, where the romantic or emotional component is explicitly secondary to the utility of the arrangement.
The relationship exists to facilitate a shared goal.
A shared activity or goal that would be difficult or impossible to maintain alone. Think of two high-level academics who get married primarily for visa reasons and shared housing, but they maintain separate, independent lives. Or two travelers who partner up exclusively to manage a nomadic existence and share expenses, viewing the romantic part as just a pleasant byproduct.
So the core glue is utility.
Utility. And if that shared activity ceases, if the visa changes, the nomadic life ends, the business venture fails, the entire structural reason for the relationship collapses. And it collapses rapidly because there's no enduring personal connection designed to withstand that loss of utility.
And finally, we get to the most confusing and maybe the most emotionally destructive structure of all, the paradoxical demands. This is the nothing serious but expect loyalty model.
This is the absolute peak of modern dissonance. It's demanding the benefits of Pillar 2 loyalty and exclusivity, while completely rejecting the requirements of Pillar 3, which is sacrifice and commitment.
So the individual establishes these rigid emotional boundaries.
Refusing to define the relationship, refusing to meet family, refusing to discuss a future, but then becomes enraged if the partner seeks intimacy or connection somewhere else. They want exclusive access and high emotional investment from their partner while they maintain their own absolute freedom and liquidity.
How does the person making that demand even rationalize such an asymmetrical power dynamic? They're basically asking for a committed spouse who has zero security.
It's often rooted in a combination of profound insecurity and an intense desire for control over their emotional environment, coupled with extreme risk aversion. They want emotional validation without any liability.
They're outsourcing their emotional security.
In a way, yes. By demanding loyalty while withholding commitment, they secure a high-quality, exclusive connection that serves their needs, while ensuring they can terminate the relationship instantly, painlessly, and without any legal or social consequence. The partner on the receiving end is just. They're set up for guaranteed disappointment. Yeah. They're forced to operate under an unofficial, unequal contract where only one person gets to set the terms.
So, okay. What does this all mean when these fundamentally contradictory rulebooks, a new traditionalist dating someone who prioritizes independence above all, are brought to the same table? All the research points directly to this. Confusion breeds predictable and painful disappointment.
And the emotional cost is immense. It's because of the waste of significant emotional time and energy. The failure is the failure to align goals early on, which makes that catastrophic crash later just unavoidable.
So it raises the question, when being together can mean 10 different things, how can we possibly navigate intimacy without clarity?
You can't, not successfully.
Let's analyze the mechanics of this mismatch, starting with misreading investment signals. This is that subtle, slow-motion failure that happens over months. One partner reads deep emotional vulnerability or shared history as proof that the relationship is moving toward permanence.
The traditional goal.
Right. And the other person sees those exact same actions as merely a byproduct of a deep but temporary connection. That's the long-term companionship or independence goal.
Let's use a really vivid scenario. Let's focus on a crisis. Imagine one partner, the traditionalist, suffers a serious, unexpected health crisis. It requires a long recovery. The traditionalist interprets their partner staying by their side, driving them to appointments, providing all this emotional support as an undeniable signal of merging futures.
A testament to in sickness and in health.
Exactly. They believe this is it. This proves we are a unit. Now, the partner who is prioritizing independence or partnership without responsibility might view that exact same help simply as the basic, decent thing you do for any close friend or sexual partner.
So it's short-term caregiving, not a down payment on a shared destiny.
Precisely. They provide excellent care for a few weeks, but the moment the crisis passes, they rigidly return to their independent structure. They refuse to discuss financial pooling for the medical bills or any shared long-term care planning.
And that's when the crash comes.
That's the crash. When the traditionalist partner then says, now that we've been through this, we should get engaged, the independent partner is just baffled. They interpret the request as an attempt at control, not a structural consolidation. The investment signal, the acts of service, was read identically, but the meaning behind those acts was totally misaligned.
And that structural misalignment leads right into the conflict over sacrifice. The clash is immediate when life demands a compromise. The partner on the sacrifice track believes prioritizing the unit's well-being is mandatory.
They see compromise as the highest form of loyalty and love. Changing career plans, accommodating a family emergency, saving money for a shared goal.
But the partner prioritizing independence above all sees that same request for compromise as an act of tyranny, unreasonable control.
Let's imagine a huge career opportunity comes up in a distant city for the independent partner. Their immediate, non-negotiable decision is to move. They expect the other partner to either follow them or the relationship ends. They see this decision as self-actualization.
But the partner on the sacrifice track sees it completely differently.
They might say, we agreed to save for a house here. Moving now destroys our savings and my career momentum. Why aren't you prioritizing us? The independent partner hears that and interprets it as the unit trying to restrict their freedom, which just proves to them why commitment is so dangerous.
So the conflict isn't even about the job.
It's not about the job at all. It's over which foundational value is sacred. The maximization of the self or the preservation of the unit. And they both feel intensely betrayed, but they are playing by diametrically opposed architectural rules.
Which brings us to the most frustrating, time-wasting element of this whole ecosystem, the failure of implicit communication. The past generation, they didn't really need to define all the boundaries. They were assumed.
But today, every single rule has to be made explicit. And yet, the discomfort of articulating these fundamentally different values up front causes massive avoidance.
The conversation feels terrifyingly high stakes.
It does. Because the consequence of being honest is immediate structural vetting failure. Asking, what are we doing? Or what are your 5-year goals for financial merging? It risks exposing a fundamental incompatibility right there on the spot.
So if one person says their goal is a new traditional marriage, and the other admits their goal is maintaining a roster and high liquidity,
the relationship ends right then and there. So people often prefer the comfort of this ambiguous, hope-filled emotional connection, even if it's laced with anxiety, rather than the painful, immediate certainty of being structurally misaligned.
It's that short-term reward of connection overriding the long-term need for structural integrity.
Exactly, and this lack of transparency about structural intentions, it prevents the necessary vetting from ever happening. People prioritize vetting for superficial compatibility. Do we laugh at the same jokes like the same restaurants have good chemistry?
And they invest 6 months of deep emotional labor based on chemistry.
Only to discover later that the fundamental goals, the actual point of the relationship, are incompatible. The modern failure is prioritizing the emotional feeling over the structural foundation. And that is why disappointment is the inevitable, cyclical byproduct of this fractured landscape. We're all out here building beautiful houses on sand.
So, given this profoundly fractured landscape where the risk of disappointment is statistically so high, how can individuals who are trying to form lasting, satisfying partnerships, how can they maximize their chances of success? If all the blueprints are shattered, what steps must we take to find someone who's actually trying to build the same structure?
Well, the forward path requires a profound shift. A shift away from assumption and toward radical clarity. And the first, most foundational step is a mandatory self-assessment. You simply cannot navigate a sea of competing intentions if you don't know your own fixed position, your non-negotiable structural requirements.
What does a proper self-assessment look like in this context, though? It can't just be, I want a long-term relationship. That's too vague.
It has to be granular. It has to be detailed. Going back to the pillars we discussed, you must define your own personal structural contract. What is your commitment velocity? How quickly do you need to progress from dating to exclusivity to formal commitment? Where do you stand on that independence versus sacrifice spectrum?
And you have to get specific.
Extremely specific. What are your non-negotiable needs regarding financial merging, geographic stability, the amount of individual autonomy you require? If you enter the dating market without total clarity on these personal structural rules, you just become a passive participant. You become susceptible to the terms dictated by the most dominant or often the most casual architecture you encounter.
So, an example. If you're a new traditionalist.
You must define the point at which non-exclusive dating becomes a deal breaker. Is it 3 dates? Is it a month? 6 months? If you value independence above all, you must define exactly which aspects of your autonomy you will never sacrifice. Is it your career mobility? Your separate finances? Your existing social circle? Knowing your personal architecture is step one.
And that clear self-knowledge leads directly to the second crucial point, which is prioritizing structural screening. We spend so much energy vetting for surface-level things.
Attraction, humor, career status, shared interests.
And as we've seen, all of those things are totally irrelevant if the underlying architectural intention is incompatible.
Absolutely. The initial conversation has to move quickly past shared tastes and into shared structural goals. This requires the courage to have those difficult conversations early, to treat the initial dates not just as chemistry tests, but as foundational interviews. You need to know early on if they view exclusivity as mandatory, negotiable, or completely non-existent.
But can we offer listeners some concrete examples of how to do that kind of screening gracefully without, launching into a commitment interrogation on the first date?
Of course. It requires integrating those questions into conversations about future planning and core values. So instead of asking, do you want to get married, which can feel aggressive, you ask, what is your philosophy on financial independence in a partnership? Or when you think about your ideal 5-year trajectory, how does geographic flexibility factor into your decision-making?
And the answer to that is very revealing.
It tells you everything. If they respond, my highest priority is maintaining the ability to relocate internationally for my job at a moment's notice, and your highest priority is buying a house and starting a family in your current city, you have achieved structural clarity. The surface attraction is irrelevant. You've just saved yourself months, maybe years, of wasted emotional labor.
And finally, the ultimate takeaway from all this analysis, the end of the default. We have to accept that the expectation that a relationship will just progress into commitment, exclusivity, and marriage, that idea is obsolete.
That trajectory is now just one of many competing options, and it is far from the most common one.
So every single parameter has to be defined.
Every single parameter of the relationship, exclusivity, future trajectory, financial expectations, the very definition of loyalty, it must be explicitly defined and mutually agreed upon. You are no longer entering a pre-existing societal contract. You are drafting a foundational document from scratch.
And if you don't?
If you are seeking a new traditional structure, you must find someone who explicitly agrees to that contract and its inherent costs, the sacrifice, the merged risk. If you avoid that difficult conversation, you are implicitly agreeing to the most casual, low-obligation interpretation possible, because that is the default setting for the majority of the fractured architectures we analyzed. The future of lasting, satisfying relationships rests entirely on radical clarity and mutual explicit agreement, not on hope or timing or assumption.
It makes you think. We live in a culture where the highest value is placed on self-actualization, independence, personal liquidity, and the avoidance of institutional risk. So if a lasting partnership requires the explicit willingness to merge lives, to reduce that liquidity, and to subordinate individual ambition for the health of the unit, what does the necessary sacrifice required for deep, lasting partnership reveal about the individual willing to make that choice today? Is commitment, defined as the willingness to prioritize the unit over the maximizing of the self, is that the ultimate modern countercultural act? Something to contemplate as you navigate this complex landscape.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and share this video. Also, let us know in the comments what really stood out to you in this conversation, and if there's any related topic or new topic that you would like covered in a future video.